Good afternoon and welcome to this final session of Understanding Comprehensive Civil Rights, a two-day discussion. Thank you for joining us. This has been an impactful 2 days with speakers who have taught us many things about the need for local civil rights protections, and I expect this session to be no less impactful. If you missed the other session, we'll have links to the recordings that we will disseminate next week. So stay tuned for that and watch for them. If you've been at all 4 sessions, thank you. A special thank you for that. But we're glad you joined us today. And if we have some first timers, let me give you a quick orientation to the Hop-In forum that we're in now. If you look on the left side of your screen, you'll see reception. That's where you first came into, and then stage. And on the stage, you'll find the PSA that Tabitha Walker of Big Hair Productions made for this event. If you haven't seen it, take a moment and watch. And thank you, Tabitha, for your incredible work. Also, you'll see below that sessions, which is where we are now, and then Expo, where we have a lot of resources and other information that you can connect with. On the right side of your screen, or the right side of where you're viewing us, you'll see there are tabs for event and session. We are in the session tab. We will not be using the event tab. So use that set of information. And under that, you'll see chat, which we have disabled because we want questions put in the question and answer one. So put your questions that we'll be putting to the panel later in the session under the Q&A tab under session. This might be the 4th time you've heard this, but it's important for everyone to know, why are we doing this? So in the wake of the recent effort to enact a comprehensive civil rights ordinance for Macon-Bibb County, it became evident that there was a strong need for education regarding why a local ordinance is necessary and what effects it would have on the community. Additionally, many questions arose about recent court rulings and how discrimination laws are currently written and interpreted. Business owners asked what local non-discrimination protections would mean for their small businesses. And finally, in some cases, erroneous or fear-inciting information was spread in the community and the focus taken away from the broad range of people these type laws are meant to protect. Black and brown neighbors, residents whose country of origin are outside the U.S., women, military veterans, and those who are differently abled. So this series was made possible through an on-the-table mini grant from Community Foundation of Central Georgia and the Knight Foundation. We're very appreciative to them, along with sponsorships from Georgia Equality, Charles E. Cox Jr., Attorney at Law, Travis Jean Emporium, the Dozier Law Firm, and Georgia Women and those who stand with us. The moderator for the multi-faith panel, which will look at beyond loving our neighbor, why civil rights protections are needed for all people of faith, is Flo Martin. Flo graciously agreed this morning to step in when Dr. Karen Bray's young son became ill during the night. Flo currently serves part-time as Direction of Education at Centenary United Methodist Church. She's a graduate of Florida Southern College and has served churches in Florida, Georgia, and Kentucky. She has served as curriculum consultant and trainer for the United Methodist Publishing House for 32 years. And Flo is actively involved in the Women's Interfaith Alliance of Central Georgia and serves as a member of its coordinating committee. Her background and current passion for multi-faith work makes her wonderfully equipped to lead this conversation today. And full disclosure, I've known Flo for a long time. As a pastor's wife, she was a close friend of my mother before my mother's death last year. And Flo is married to Reverend Tommy Martin, who, like my dad, is a retired United Methodist minister. So thank you, Flo, for answering my call and stepping in at the last moment today to lead this important conversation. And I'll now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you all for participating and being with us in this final session. We're looking forward to hearing from the panelists, and I'm going to just quickly introduce them. They have such wonderful resumes, and I hope that you will take time as you are part of this community to get to know these wonderful faiths that are a part of Middle Georgia area. But around the table, we have, then again, And Sarah is the interim pastor at High Street University. She arrived here in August of 2020 from Topeka, Kansas. She's a second career minister. She completed her Master of Divinity at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver in 2014. She received her final fellowship in February of 2000. She has a strong grounding in prophetic ministry through interfaith advocacy work and community organizing. Her ministry is also enriched by her work in urban community colleges in Dallas and Denver and her previous degree in public administration. In addition, she also has training through the Center for Renewal and Wholeness in Education in leading retreats and formation work based on the work and leadership of Parker Palmer. And I'm going to now move down to Rabbi Elizabeth Bayer. And we're glad that Rabbi Bayer is with us. She was ordained in 2009 from the Hebrew Union College. She joined Temple Beth Israel here in Macon in 2020 in the midst of a pandemic. She was serving as rabbi at the congregation Ahaveth Hesed, I'll practice this, Ahaveth Hesed in Jacksonville, Florida, and Temple B'nai Shalom in Huntsville, Alabama. While in both of these congregations, she promoted inclusivity and innovation. She has earned recognition by the Forward as one of America's 33 most inspirational rabbis. And she is currently president of the Southeast region of the Central Conference of American Rabbis and a proud parent, and this is what's important, to Aiden, David, and Daniel. And so we know that that's important. Reverend C. James Carter, or as I know him, Pastor Chris, and many as well. Pastor Chris answered the call to the pastoral ministry in April of 2005. He served as minister for several churches in Middle and South. He attended and received his education at college with a concentration in church music. He's currently enrolled at Liberty University, finishing a degree in Christian ministry. For over 7 years, Chris served as campus minister at Fort State University, and he has served African Methodist Episcopal, AME churches, and United Methodist churches in Middle Georgia. Currently, he's the founding and lead pastor of the Hebrew Ministries, which was launched in February 2015. His passion is helping people in their faith walk, and he offers a ministry of no judgment, just Jesus. Joining us, Chris. Imam, hey friend. Imam Adam was born in Guinea of Liberian parents. After attending school in both countries, he earned his BA in Islamic education at the University of Medina and his master's and PhD at the International University of Malaysia. He has served in Malaysia, during which he traveled to the Republic of Congo, Brazzaville, to Morocco, to Malaysia, and to the United States to deliver educational and religious services. Since 2007, Imam Adam has served as an imam for the Muslim community of Middle Georgia as an adjunct professor at Wesleyan, as a halal contractor for the Purdue Chicken Farm in Perry, Georgia. And in addition to leading the Islamic community of Central Georgia, he currently works at Fort Valley State University. And Imam Adam and his wonderful family live in Warner Robins. And I want to say particularly a Rabbi being on this panel on the eve of Sabbath beginning, and to Imam Adam for joining us during the season, and knowing that he will need to leave a little bit early because of the Ramadan prayer service that he will be a part of. So thank you all for being here. And it's great to see your faces, and thank all of the participants for sharing in this time together. Just that I'm going to let the panelists all receive, and it's many of you have been a part of interfaith conversations before, may recognize as an important one. We want to begin by asking how the central tenets of your faith influence your thoughts on civil rights. In other words, what does your faith teach about civil rights and the protection of minority views, minoritized people, and the equal treatment of people? And yeah, I know y'all are preachers, but don't go to preaching. No, I'm teasing. I'm married to see that. Just share, what in your faith, and do you see as your thoughts on civil rights? And I'm just thinking, this is what I'm going to do. This is, some of you will recognize that we do this. We start with our oldest tradition. So Rabbi, I'm going to allow you to move, and then we'll move to Chris and Imam and Sarah. Okay.
I first want to say thank you so much, Flo, and thank you all of you for attending this wonderful conference. And I hope that we're able to walk away from here with open hearts and open minds. So there's a couple views in Judaism that I think are very applicable to understanding civil rights and specifically comprehension of civil rights. One, we believe that we are all created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, meaning every human created in the image of God. Isn't that a magnificent thing? Because none of us look alike, and God must be a beautiful creature in beyond any scope of our imagination, or at least my imagination. We're also taught to love your neighbor as yourself. And neighbor is understood to be large and encompassing, not just simply our physical neighbors who live to our right and to our left, but really people in our neighborhood and in our broader community, and to love all individuals. And lastly, we're taught, and especially loudly in the prophetic literature, this coming from Amos and Hosea, to take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And that represents specifically those on the margins, those during the biblical times where the poor, the widow, and the orphan were not always understood to have access or have somebody protecting him or be part of a house. So really this is understood to be inclusive of any individual who's on the margin, recognizing that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And that, I think, was said by Emma Lazarus. So I will close with that and just try to be short, succinct, recognizing that we have many other people on the panel who might also want to equally hear from.
Okay. I've been told that I can't be seen, and I'm going to try and figure that out. But go ahead, and if you will just pick that up, Chris, and then helpful.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's glad to be on, and thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this. And I'm excited to be a part of this. And in light of what a rabbi said, we all share the same in our beliefs in civil rights, that, I always remind first, God is love. That's number one. And because God is love, I like to tell people that in creation, we meet the creator, in seeing people, we get to see God. And so with that, we learn that all people are equal, and we love as God has called us to love. So in that respect, same thing she mentioned, I say ditto with, because our scriptures parallel in that is our hope, that we share in the same love and the same unity. And as scripture tells us, that is our job, to love our neighbor, right? And that's what we teach all the time. Love God, love people. That's what we believe in. So that's a simple answer without preaching.
Yes. Sarah, would you want to share?
Imam can go first.
Imam, Adam.
No.
He's going to unmute.
Yes.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to our organizer, our sponsor, and my colleague on panelists. Thank you all. This is very special for me, coming in the month of Ramadan and also on Friday. What a choice. But like Ms. Flo said, Yes, we do have afternoon service. That's why you see me dressing the way I'm dressed, actually, for the service. From here, I will just do the transition from my office into the sanctuary and deliver the sermon for the Friday khutbah today. But thank you all for inviting me and inviting Muslims in the Middle Georgia to be a part of this. I'm very proud of what we are doing here in Middle Georgia together, especially you, Ms. Flo, and your husband. You're a wonderful human being. We cherish your friendship so much. Moving forward, the question is, what the tenet of your faith teach? I think some of you will know it. Islam has the 5 pillars of Islam is believing in the unity of God, establishing prayer, giving charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. But the first one is the most significant one, the unity of God. The way Muslims understand the unity of God is the unity of humanity. Like Rabbi Bahar said before, that all in their belief, all humans are created in the image of God. Muslims believe in the word La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. So unity of God reflects the unity of humanity. We are one humanity. And that is the very important thing that all Muslims can believe in and live with and die with. The most significant tenet in our faith. And therefore, you go further from that to say that our father, the father of a human being, were Adam, not Adam, the first Adam. I just happen to have the same name. But he's the father of humanity with Eve. And God keeps saying that in the Quran in many places, "O mankind, we have created you from single pair, Adam and Eve, and made you into nation and tribe so you may know each other." So we are here as one humanity, and that is the problem, because some humans try to really divide us and tell us, no, you are not one humanity. And that's been the suffering of human beings. As long as we keep doing that, we are just destroying our strength and our power. We need to understand that one humanity, one God. And if we really understand that well, we will work for the betterment of every human being, not just me or not just few. That's how we understand. I pause.
So it's also an honor to me to be with all of you today. It's kind of appropriate that I'm going last. We are the youngest tradition of those presented today, and we actually come out of the Judeo-Christian heritage. We were originally a Christian tradition that has become a pluralistic tradition, which means that folks within our the Unitarian Universalist community might have both cultural and religious backgrounds from a whole wide range of places, and they may still have practices and beliefs that come with that. And so we sort of have a way of accessing the knowledge and wisdom and tradition of a wide range of practices and beliefs. And we've kind of narrowed those down into some specific principles that sort of point to this wisdom in a way that anyone, whether they believe in God or not, could engage with. And so one of the most core pieces of that is the idea of the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And this is really at the core of our connection to the civil rights work that's happening right now. It's this idea that, just as was so eloquently spoken of the three before me, all human beings are human beings, and we all deserve access to the same possibilities of life and living. And we also have our seventh principle, which says that everything is interconnected. Basically, we're all part of an interconnected web, and what happens to one of us happens to all of us. In between that first and seventh principle, we have 5 principles that basically talk about justice, equity, and compassion, that this is part of our goal in being a religious community, that we all have a religious or spiritual path to follow, and while yours and mine might not look the same, we can agree to create space for both of us to meet those spiritual needs in the ways that make sense for us. So it's kind of odd to say that when I preach, I'm preaching to a group of people who might be atheists, might be Christian, might be someone of Jewish heritage, might have practices that come out of the Sufi tradition, or who might just be trying to figure it all out. And all of those people are in one space. So we've got to create a way to hold all of that. And we have a really strong background in this idea of the right of conscience and using democratic processes. And the idea behind this is that everyone's voice counts, and no decision should be made about a community where their voice hasn't been heard. And to me, this is actually really the very core place of where we get involved in civil rights conversations, because every one of us has an identity, and those identities and those ways of being in the world should be part of the conversations that determine how we're going to live in this world together. So it's good to be with you all.
Thank you for, and participants know we're having some technical difficulties. So if we fade out, don't dismay, just listen, and you'll as we work through this time. Basically, we have a foundation for caring for all, and that means that we are aware of those that might feel like equal. But let me ask you this: have you, in your own life or faith experience, have you in your life maybe felt where your faith was a cause for someone treating you differently or discriminating against you? Or maybe you've had a issue experience that impact how you feel about civil rights legislation.
So I think since are we still continuing in the same order?
Go, Rabbi. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that as a Jew, the broad
I think
assumption
that we need to speak to that question, because I know probably as a Christian.
Okay, I'm sorry, Flo, I didn't catch your question.
I was saying, I was ahead because I think that, yes, are you hearing me? As a white woman, I probably face a whole lot less discrimination and have a lot less, been discriminated against. And so I'm wanting to hear from perhaps those in the faith tradition that experience. And I certainly know of incidents we've had in our area and beyond our area with that. So yes, go right ahead, Rabbi Bear. Please start.
So I think I'll open this by saying that a second generation survivor of the Holocaust, like the Holocaust definitely impacted my family, and I can tell you concentration camps where my family were murdered. And so that was always an assumption growing up of don't be too far out. We don't know what may happen. But in addition to that, just growing up and having that in the background, growing up in America where it's largely assumed that you're Christian, and winter pageantry or anything of that nature is dominated by Christmas. And I'm always proud when I see a single menorah or Hanukkah present, because I know that there's been an attempt to be inclusive, at least in that experience. But for my congregation, more specifically in the past where I've served, I've heard from congregants who've shared with me that they've been the recipient or the butt of jokes, anti-Semitic jokes shared at the water cooler, Holocaust jokes. And some of my congregants have chosen not to wear, especially if they're male, a kippah, something on their head, signifying out that they are Jewish in specific locations, recognizing that they would not be received very well. And I know that the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life congregation, deeply impacted me personally. And that's a congregation that I have prayed in. I grew up in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, when we look at statistics on the FBI list of hate crimes against the Jewish community is always at the top. And so while it is something that, I don't want to, sit there and say it happens all the time, because on one hand, we as a people tend to blend in with the color of our skin and can definitely pass as amongst other people without facing discrimination outwardly. On the other hand, when it's known that we are Jewish, there are times when we do face discrimination. And I've had congregants inform me that they've been passed over for job promotions and the like because of their religious identification as a Jew. And so it is something that does need to be addressed publicly, that we need to be inclusive of all.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Imam Adam, would you respond to that? No, that probably has been. And then how does that impact you? How you feel about civil legislation?
First of all, I would like to thank friends like you and people who practice different faith than that of mine, but they choose to love you, and you can feel it. When you talk about discrimination, yes, personally, I have my little story, but I will leave that aside because I can handle it. But in our community, especially women subject to many of this type of stereotyping, because our women, Muslim women, they wear hijab, headscarf. For me, like men, if today is not Friday, you will not see me dressing like this in public. But our women, they wear hijab, and because of that, some of them get targeted. I can share a story with you that happened in our local, one of our local school. I will not name the school just for the protection. And this was really awkward because as our government, United States government, every year they invite international student, high schooler to come and spend like 1 year in one of America's school in high school. It's called exchange program. And the goal of it is done by the State Department. The goal of this is for them to get to use to American culture and how diverse American culture is and how we are united in our diversity and how tolerant we are and all those good values that we cherish in our society. And there was this particular student who came from Nigeria, and she was a Muslim girl, and she was one who wore hijab in her school. But she was the guest of American government and American people, and one of the family in One Robins here, volunteered to host her in their house. So the girl is excited, he's in America, the greatest country in the world, and he's going to benefit from American education. She dressed up as any girl, Muslim girl will dress up in her locality in Africa. And she went to school. And coming to school, the principal welcomed her at the door by telling her, go back, take that off, or go home. And the girl was just unbelievable. And she said, what? She said, take that off or go home. And the principal didn't know who the girl is. So the foster parent immediately called me and some of the leaders in our community, and we have to step in. But we didn't want to make any big deal of it. This is just some of the small example. We went sit down with the principal, and the U.S. State Department representative was there, mayor's office was there, Board of Education was there, and telling her who this student is. She's supposed to know the good American culture, and here, this is the best you can present as America. I think that principal was embarrassed, but we didn't want to expose her. We just handled the case quietly, and she said she was sorry, she didn't know. But we said, how about regular people like my daughters? They go to school with hijab. Is this what you're going to do to them? deny the medication simply because of how they dress. So those kind of things happen, and happen in a hospital sometimes, that Muslim nurse or Muslim doctor, are asked to remove their hijab. In one particular operating room, the chief doctor was a Muslim woman. And someone asked her that if a Muslim educate their daughters or not. And she was a chief doctor. It was like a slap on the face to her. But yes, we do experience, but the good thing is the law, American law, in which we can all be proud of, provide protection for you, to fight for your right, and let everybody know that those things the law will not tolerate. With that, I pause. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to offer any response to this as well, this question as well?
Sure. In my in my journey of ministry, I have experienced this because I have been placed as a young minister in predominantly white churches. I serve as one of the. I hope y'all can hear. Oh Lord, I think they're trying to do something in the sanctuary. Sorry. But I served in, and now I'm serving a congregation that is predominantly white, besides the healing experience. And so there has been experiences as a young preacher in that, especially in my early years of watching the discrimination happen right before your eyes. I never forget when I served the church, and I do the same, won't share the church, but served the church, and I got an anonymous letter, sent to my office saying, "We don't want you here. You need to go. We don't like your kind in our church, and why are you here?" and so forth, And I never forget, we hosted an event where we had some people from different places come and journey, and they made such an uproar about us having a predominantly African-American group within the context of the church. So we experienced that in that way, and I became brokenhearted by it, because I was like, man, this is not what God intended for us. This is not what, I didn't think this was the model of the church, and this was the model of God. I always had that, I used to think about what my great grandma used to say, we like different clothes, we like different shoes, we decorate with different colors, but we struggle to embrace different people. And I just couldn't understand that, and it was a struggle for me trying to figure out, how do I preach the gospel to people I don't know if they want me here, and that was a struggle for years. But then here's what God downloaded to me. I had to remember, first, God is love, and with that, we, as in the church, we always say that Jesus came for the sick, not the well. And there are some people who are struggling and wounded and need healing. And so how do I be that godly example in love, that they will see the embracing factor that I'm human just like you. We share common, unique things. And so how do we come together in that uniqueness? And I used to use the example of crayons all the time, that in the beautiful box of crayons, all colors come together and make a beautiful masterpiece. And when you go outside and you look at God's creation, you see God's creation at work. And if God can take all those colors and make that beautiful masterpiece, what can you do? What can God do with you and me? Being different in race or what have you. So we wind that from a preaching moment.
Okay, so moving from, how does that then impact what you feel? Civil rights legislation. Why are our faith voices important in public policy decisions? And is it important for to have civil rights protection for those that are a part of different faiths? And I don't want to, I know I asked a question, but how does that impact your feeling about civil rights legislation? Yes, Sarah.
Can I answer that, Will?
Yeah, go right. Jump in.
So I also have experienced discrimination by being a non-Christian church. A lot of folks have referenced the UUs as sort of non-Bible based, because we don't use scripture to preach from on a regular basis, or we don't just use Christian scripture. We use a lot of different resources, some of which are secular. So not always being recognized as actually being a faith community. And then also as a woman in a profession where for until the last 2 or 3 decades was predominantly men serving. And we certainly still have some faith traditions where women are not serving in leadership. And so I've been in spaces in Wyoming and in Kansas where I was one of very few women in the room doing this work. But I think for me, the civil rights component is this, that we should be able to go to work, we should be able to go to school, we should be able to use public services, even including ones that might be run by another faith community, like a homeless shelter, without facing discrimination. And we should be able to use those same things just as any other person in the community would. And that should include, like, if I go to work after the meeting, if I'm not Christian and somebody wants to offer a Christian prayer, I shouldn't be required to sit through that, which doesn't limit your ability to give that prayer for yourself or somebody else. But just thinking about time and space, how are my religious views or your religious views being kept from being seen and also being practiced in the way that you want to? We tend to really privilege particular religious practices and views, and really, as Rabbi pointed out and Imam pointed out, in a very Christocentric culture, it's very hard sometimes for others to even be seen or included, and people's practices regularly leave folks out. And the example I had about the homeless shelter is one that really sticks with me, because I had a woman who was staying in a homeless shelter in a town that I lived in that was run by sort of the Christian community, and it was private. It wasn't a public service in the sense that it wasn't run by the city. And folks who didn't identify as Christian, who had other identities that didn't mesh with the religious beliefs of that group, didn't feel comfortable in that shelter, and it was the only shelter serving the city. And so I think that we need to really think about the ways in which our religious views and practices create spaces that aren't safe and aren't welcoming for other folks, and how we can be more aware of how we create those spaces and intentional. And that's what is, what we're talking about now. That's what an ordinance would help us to do.
I think, just to bounce off of you, Sarah, that it's hard sometimes for people to recognize that, especially if they're in a dominant culture, that they are acting with discriminatory behaviors. Sometimes they're brought up a specific way with a specific, and it's accepted. They don't even see it. And I'm reminded often of the verse in the Bible, don't put a stumbling block before a blind person. And the truth is that we all have blind spots, and some of those spots lead to misogynistic behavior. Some of those blind spots lead to racist behavior and discriminatory behavior. And we're not even aware of it because they are internal blind spots. And having legislation of this nature would help make us more aware of where those blind spots are. The emotional kickback through that realization, though, can be extreme, in that people may feel fearful and may not want to admit that they have been acting misogynistically or discriminating against somebody based on race, religion, sexual orientation, or any other such thing. And that's where we have to know that we have to hold everybody with love, grace, and compassion up, everybody. Because nobody wants to think of themselves as a bad person. They're just trying to be a gatekeeper for what they think is right and wrong, not understanding that sometimes gatekeeping can be just as painful for the person that they're pushing out as it is for the person that they're including. And that it's not, and let me be even more specific, having a legislation that guarantees protection of everybody limits that ability to have somebody be a gatekeeper in a homeless shelter or in a store or anywhere else, and I think would guarantee protections toward everybody, where everybody is held to a standard and treated with love and compassion and ultimately respect.
I'd like to share. When you look up the definition of civil rights, I look at that and I start to think hard about it. First of all, I struggle with the fact that we have to have legislation for people to feel free, to feel loved, to feel welcomed, or the fact that you have to feel belong. I struggle with that. But this is supposed to be the land of the free, and and so forth. So I struggle with that sometimes, that we even have to even fight for that. That we're God's children. We are all supposed to live here in peace, and so forth. I also get the fact that, and I'm not negating what anybody says, but to be honest, I get about the different religious practices and being open with that. But as a young African-American male, I struggle with the fact that there's some days I don't feel like I belong. You're scared of that sometimes. And so before I can fight for anything else, I'm still fighting. Can I be welcome? Will I be able to walk the sidewalk and nobody jump off the sidewalk when I come? Or do I have to wear certain things just to feel in the room because I don't want nobody to think I'm a thug or what have you? If I decide to wear tennis shoes today and I'm a black person in the neighborhood and walking my dog, sometimes that's a struggle. We're talking about loving thy neighbor, and so that's the reality that sometimes we face, is that why do we even have to fight for this in any context, in religion, in person's identity, or what have you? That's a struggle I see every day, and I hear my students say that when I'm walking the community, is that, man, why do we have to fight for something that should already exist? That we should love each other, that we should walk in unity with each other, when God invites us, that our job is to connect, as Jesus said, that we all be one. And so that's a struggle I have, that why do we have to face that in some day? So I don't have no profound thoughts on that, but that's just hearing everybody's, and what people say every day. That's a struggle for me. It's like, man, we fighting to belong, let alone trying to get other practices or beliefs to be initiated in so many contexts.
Yeah, I would like to share that in Islamic tradition, if you ask me, what's the ultimate goal of Islam? All Muslims believe Islam came to achieve 5 goals. Number 1 is being protection of human life, property, human dignity, intellect, and freedom of religion. Those 5 goals are the goal that Islam came to achieve for humanity. And Muslims, during their golden age, when they practice this, they flourish. But what happened when people start denying those qualities of God in the society, which is unity and treating everybody equally and with respect, God started withdrawing himself from our life. Here in America, thank God, we still have a lot of this good thing in the American society, which you don't find somewhere else around the world. But if we don't protect them, if we don't safeguard them, if we end up being on the extreme side and marginalizing the minority, what happened to civilization before us could happen to us as well. So this is very, very important. All these people are God's creation, and they all need to be treated with respect and dignity. That's what God wants. If you don't do that, God will withdraw from you. So you're on your own, and we can survive on our own. Our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to say, "Man adha dhimmiyan fa'ana khasmuhu yawm al-qiyamah." Whoever abused non-Muslim in Muslim society, he said, I will take fight with you in front of God in the day of judgment. So we really have to be careful.
One of the things that I hear you saying, the theme that's coming through all of this, is that all, even those we disagree with or our faith does not embrace, we must embrace all. I'm hearing that it's important that all be embraced. And I was going to ask, have you, either in your denomination or your faith personally, or your congregation perhaps, seen a move where you have moved to a more accepting place of difference of the rights that maybe have formerly been excluded? Have you seen how that may strengthen your faith?
So if I can speak, in 1973, we ordained Sally Priesand, the first female rabbi ordained in America. Prior to that, most rabbis, except for Regina Jonas, who was ordained in Germany in the 1930s, were men. and women are still somewhat thought of as unique in the role of rabbi. In the 1990s, the Reform movement began ordaining LGBT rabbis, and really including LGBTQ plus individuals into the rabbinate, and encouraging rabbis who felt comfortable to perform same-sex marriages. That's continued through today. And I can tell you that from my perspective as a Reform rabbi, when I look out in the congregations, what we're also seeing is an inclusion finally of persons of color, recognizing that Jews come from Ethiopia, that Jews come from other parts of the world, and that we're not all Ashkenazic or European descent, but Jews, it's a global religion. And we're finally also seeing that move toward inclusion. And what a gift that is into the movement, that there is now, I think, that I'm aware of a handful of rabbis who are persons of color. And their view and their experience has only added to help strengthen and enhance the voice of what is Reform Judaism. Thank you.
Someone else want to share either a movement personally or within your faith community, or how perhaps you have seen it to be perhaps more understanding and more accepting?
I would love to say personally no, but in Muslim community recently, it has happened where different minority is being subject to mistreatment, like Yazidi in Iraq, or places like that. And that's why we are suffering. If you see Muslim at the global level, we have so many problems, because when extremists take things to their hand, it just makes everybody suffer. So that's why living in a society that is, practice tolerance and harmony, is important for us to see this. But personally, no, this has not happened to me.
I have seen some changes as right now I'm sitting in a building of a beautiful building of a church who has had a history of being segregated as a congregation, and they struggled with that in the past. And the fact that we are coming together to be congregation together, predominantly Afrocentric culture with a Eurocentric culture, if you will, coming together in one building to do shared ministry and merging together to do ministry. And so that is one thing, a great movement, and see the congregants here celebrate that. Also to be called to serve a church in Ronald Robbins that is a predominantly white congregation, and being their first African-American preacher, and now seeing African-American and Hispanic and Asian families unite with that congregation the last 2 months. We're seeing some drastic change, and we're seeing so much things being embraced. And in both contexts of churches, we're seeing healing happen, which is beautiful. And people being honest and truthful about that process of healing, and what I like to call, instead of saying racial reconciliation, I like to say creational unity. That we're unifying it in God's creation, because you can't reconcile what never existed. So we're coming together on different races, different cultures, and doing some healing that we can be more effective together in ministry. So I'm seeing that birthed beautifully right here in the context of this church.
Yeah, and I would say, just to keep it super local, High Street was the first congregation in Topeka to have an out lesbian minister. And this sort of mirrors our tradition in terms of being among the very, very first denominations in the 1800s to ordain women, and to ordain out gay, out lesbian, and trans clergy. So in that sense, I think we've been really at the forefront of some of that work. We also went through and changed a lot of the language in our religious documents and even our songs and things to be non-gendered. Working to make sure that we invite folks to let us know what their pronouns are and things like that. So I think many of our churches have made even changes to their physical buildings and to how they create accessibility for folks with disabilities. So I think we have sort of theologically a commitment to loving beyond belief and to loving the whole person, just as Pastor Carter was talking about. But I also would say that there's this, like at the denominational level, when we gather as a large group, we're practicing things that I think are really in alignment with those values. But I think at the individual and the congregational level, there's still a lot of struggle. So I'd say we're sort of simultaneously aspirational and inspirational, that there are places in which we're sort of at the forefront of doing some of this work, and places where we are exactly where everyone else in the culture is, in dealing with racism and dealing with homophobia and dealing with just the differences that human beings walk with and create just by being alive. I think it's really important to maintain a sort of sense of humility around that our aspirations and how we show up in the world don't always align, and to be honest about that. I love what Pastor Carter also said, just about being honest with each other and creating a space in which we can really have some more of those honest conversations. I see my denomination really working hard to do some of that work around racial systemic racism and white supremacy culture, and trying to really figure out how are we continuing to create this, even when we're saying something, but doing something different. So I think the work is there. And I think if we can create spaces where we can have real relationship and real conversations, that's part of the work of the faith community, is to create those spaces and to help others come into them to have those conversations.
So as we do the work of the faith community, as we create those spaces, even in our own congregations, wherever we may be, what are resources that you think might, in moving, that arise from even our congregants, and then even congregants to community where there may be misinformation? What are the provide to enable this?
So one of the sociologists who I follow is Jonathan Haidt, and he speaks a lot about the red and blue divide that is America. And he'll look and he's analyzed how our brains of people who are conservative function and liberal function, and how we've become simply more polarized. And there's a lot of sociologists who are attempting to analyze this. And what they're finding is both startling in the sense that if you were to put a study that's about to come out, that if you put somebody who's conservative and you have them look at a news feed that has a lot of liberal or left-leaning statements at it, they tend to become more entrenched in their conservative position. And yet I find that actually is an opportunity, as frightening as that study is, for the faith communities to simply remind all of us that our faith is a practice. It is a spiritual practice to love somebody else. It is a spiritual practice to struggle to find the divine in that person, to reach beyond simply the clickbait, which is put in front of us in our social media streams. And it is a spiritual practice which forces us to have wonderful conversations, which might be challenging. And as Pastor Carter shared, be open and be honest. One of the exciting things that I've had is I've had Pastor Carter over to my house for lunch, and I'm looking forward to having Imam Fafana and Sarah over as well in the future, because it's important to have those conversations. And those conversations come out of simple things like Hachnasat Orchim, which is a Jewish value, which means welcoming in the stranger. It comes out of having wonderful moments of recognition that I have more in common with the imam and he with me than I may necessarily have with you, Flo, in certain areas, because we're both people who are minorities. And when you look at how we eat, I keep kosher, he keeps halal. I'm very observant in certain things, and so is he. Our calendars are reflective in the sense that they're both lunar based. And so there's different ways that we can connect. And it's important that while we are, especially now, in a period of extreme polarization, and we can see that, again, I encourage you to look at Jonathan Haidt's work amongst other sociologists, but now is the time for our voices to come forward. It's also the time when it's the most challenging, when we also have fewer people who are affiliating, and affiliation rates have dipped below 50%. And that, again, is an opportunity, I think, for faith communities to go out, push out a message of love, kindness, welcoming, encourage people to have relationships and build relationships with one another. Those things don't happen overnight. They take time and, most importantly, effort, and they're not easy. I will invariably say something that, chas v'chalila, God forbid, may actually offend Pastor Carter, though I don't know if that's possible. He's a very loving human. And he may actually say something that may upset me and ruffle a few of my feathers, though I happen to think that my feathers are awesome. I think in general, though, he and I will find that we love food. I like soul food. And we'll find things to laugh about and joke about and see the humanity in one another.
I will jumpstart on that by saying that, yes, it is important. The key here is education. We need to educate people. There is so much ignorance and in human society, and human are enemy of what they are ignorant of. If you don't know something, you become fearful of that. You're not sure about that. But education open up your mind, open up your heart. So for us as religious leaders, we need to open up our congregation, our mosque, our synagogue, our churches. And you, Ms. Flo, you've been part of a Women Interfaith Alliance in Middle Georgia. It just keep growing. And those are very elements where we learn about each other and know each other better in an open space. Here in Georgia, I can tell you, is start giving fruit. We Muslim community in Georgia, we are surprised that this Ramadan, we have more politicians coming and offering Ramadan greeting, to the Muslims that, we keep sharing. Oh, did you hear that? Our governor offered Ramadan greeting to the Muslims. And this happened all the way to the White House, to our leader telling people, look, these people might be different in their faith, but we are all American. And those kind of very touchy. It touches us when we hear that, And like I said, education is the key, and we have to live the example. It's easier to preach it than to do it. You have to act on it. I would say one of my best friends in this area since I've lived in Middle Georgia has been Rabbi Larry Schlesinger. Even 2 weeks ago, we had lunch together. He is my big brother, but he will take the journey to come all the way to Fort Valley, and we will be sitting there in Georgia room eating. And what an amazing human being. So we have to live an example by educating the young generation what it means to be tolerant of others and accepting others. Thank you.
I share. I want to thank Rabbi for inviting me over to lunch. It was very good and it was different. And it was my first time eating certain things. So I am very thankful for that. And that's the art that we ought to teach, is embracing, right? That God is diverse in so many ways. And so we ought to be diverse and try things. As I teach my church all the time, we're not trying to be religious. We're trying to be relational, that God wants us to connect. I think we spend so much time to connect to religion than becoming relational. We have our backgrounds. Yes, true enough. but we lose the art of being relational and connecting together. And what I've learned in my journey, that's why, you know, you're right, I don't get offended easily. I may not agree with a lot of everything, and I may not know it. That's why it's important, as we teach in the church, is number one, let's not just be emotional and entertained, but let's be empowered and enlightened. You know, I try to make sure we design how we gather in worship is not just emotionalism and entertainment, but we're being enlightened and empowered. How do we learn from each other? There's a lot I want to learn. That's why I ask questions. You know, I love to learn, and each of you, I would love to learn from you. And that's how we grow together. That's how we learn together. And I think because we don't know, fear comes in, and we respond in fear versus anything else. I think most of the time, some people, once we learn each other, we'll find out we actually love each other. We like each other, but fear keeps us disconnected because we don't know. And I think if we start to say first, here's the question I say all the time. What am I willing to learn, and am I teachable? And if I'm teachable, I'm willing to learn every culture, every background, see why they do things. Why is this? And I'd be like, wow, okay. That is interesting. I like that. And I would love to go. So that's why you see me everywhere. You'll see me attend someone's services anywhere. I'd be like, yeah, I come because I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to connect. I want to be relational. And then I'm empowered and enriched through each of that. And so if we can do that, I think we can get out of that fear, take rejection away, and then we'll start embracing each other in our different places of life.
Mm-hmm.
Have a huge amen for all of that, all of what all three of you said. I think what you just pointed out, Pastor Carter, is the reality that these are learnable skills. I think I first kind of encountered that idea in the intercultural development theory, which says, you know, sort of our ability to be intercultural and to connect with people from different backgrounds is something we can learn and develop. And there's things we can actually tangibly do to learn those skills and gain them. And you just pointed out several of them. And one of them is knowing each other's stories and being willing to be teachable. I love that. That's actually one of my mottos too. Like, am I coachable? And so what am I willing to learn? I think that's so perfect. One of the things I just learned this recently was from a book that I read by Resmaa Menakem, who wrote On My Grandmother's Hands. And he's an African-American somatic psychologist. And he talks about something that he terms somatic abolitionism. And it's really about how do we open our hearts, not just our minds, but how do we actually get to that? So when we respond to each other in fear, we're responding from like our serpent brain, right? the part of us that goes just straight to the somatic part of our body and not up here in our cortex. And so how do we open up our hearts and have experiences with each other? And he teaches us that we can learn to practice, as Rabbi was saying, to create practices that help us center and be present and be ready to listen, ready to learn, ready to accept one another and walk with one another. And I think all of those pieces have been really important in my personal development in expanding my intercultural capacities, for sure. So just a couple things from my experience. And yay, I just love being in this conversation with all of you. I was on mute, but I said amen a lot and right on and yes.
And we're all, many of us, and I want to thank Adam for his kind words about the Women's Interfaith Alliance. One of the things we have discovered is what has happened over the years is because of a lot of the things you all were saying. You know, you eat together, you tell stories together, you hold each other's children, you listen to one another, and then you invite someone else to experience what you're experiencing else, and the circle widens, and that experience we have of the love that is bubbling up has been tremendous. And you know, Chris, where you can really get a lot of good food is from the Women's Interfaith. Eventually eat together again.
Had to come.
I know we're all, oh, I know, Rabbi Elizabeth, you know, you've been here this year and you haven't had the era as well. The luncheons start up again, and you'll see how wonderful it is. So let me just move us a little, yes. Another thought. The city of Savannah has passed the Comprehensive Civil Rights Ordinance, and they have this statement in their ordinance. Ask this because it does kind of approach the issue of faith, where sometimes that this ordinance is a religious from limiting its non-commercial accommodations, advantages, and privileges to persons of the same religion. And the beginning of all this, would this clause, or how might this clause that faith leaders or congregations might about an ordinance?
I'll jump in.
Okay,
For me, especially as someone whose tradition has been willing to marry, say, gay couples, for example, for a long time, this means that I can practice that and you don't have to. So if that's not part of your tradition and that's not something that you've told your religious professionals they can do, great. Nobody's going to force you to do that. But it means that I can, and both of us get respected by that kind of language. So I think that's a really important thing, is to see that allowing someone to practice their beliefs doesn't mean that you are simultaneously are going to make them practice yours. So creating a space where all of us can practice our beliefs in a way that doesn't run over each other, I guess. Yeah. So there's more to say about that, but that's where I'm going to leave it off.
Okay.
I would like to jump in. This might be my last intervention before I leave you guys. I love you all. Thank you very much for this. This ordinance, I don't, comprehensively understand it. But if it's something, in every religion, like we talk here, we know we have so much in common, but we have to admit that we have differences. So if the services that, religious group, provide is non-commercial, is something, solely for the followers of the religion, and you limit that, and it doesn't cause a discrimination against anybody, I'm fine with that. We all have uniqueness in our religion. The problem is if it causes someone to suffer, if it causes someone to be discriminated against, if it causes somebody to leave or to feel uncomfortable, then if that is the case, I will say let that stay in Savannah, not in Macon, not coming to Macon. But if that's not the case, if embrace everybody, but providing unique services that your religion profess to religious followers, that's fine. We all have those uniqueness, and that are part of being tolerant to those uniqueness and differences that we have.
And Imam, we know you do need to leave. Thanks on you, and thank you for sharing this time, being with us during this period of Ramadan. And Mubarak.
Ramadan Kareem. Ramadan Kareem. Thank you.
Rabbi, Chris?
I think as a Reform Jew, we try to recognize that the tent of Reform Judaism is fairly broad. And as I would say one of our operating principles is that when you have 3 Jews, you have at least 10 opinions. It's a joke, but the truth is that, we're always trying to understand things better and improve things. And sometimes that can be being more inclusive and less inclusive of our members with the intent of ultimately hoping to love all of our members and honor everybody as much as possible. And so regarding that, I think that, and I understand that this is simply, if I understand this correctly, to practice our faith so that it's not impacting negatively anybody outside of our faith tradition.
Any other, I don't want to, Chris or Sarah, or say anything else? Okay. So as we're a part of this conversation, I would also say to participants, there is a Q&A section, and you're welcome to put in any questions that you would like for us to address, or any of the panelists to. One of the things that, let's see, popped up. So let me read it. And it says, already receptive to LGBT people, but the enormous divide remains as LGBTQ plus come up against the very vocal and hostile corporate faith / church wall. What is?
So Jim, I want to thank you for asking that question. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know if there is a fix, because that large area of the systematized church wall, as you describe it, it's within, it's not even accessible for me as a Jew. So, it's not something that I even have access to when I see and recognize that it's not just a faith tradition that is discriminatory toward LGBTQ+. It can be discriminatory toward women in their reproductive rights. It can be discriminatory toward other people in other ways. And in its attempts to limit contraception use, and its statements about areas of civil rights and understanding of systemic racism. And I don't know what the fix is beyond having continuous conversation, beyond really working and striving to reach out again and again and again, and recognizing that this is a spiritual practice. It's not something that we get into and we just master overnight. Our faith demands that we engage and engage and engage. And that's the gift. That's what happens when we ride our bikes. We get up and we go and we practice and we keep riding and we push through those moments of discomfort. And I'm using the bike example as obviously as a metaphor. But this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. We as a society did not arrive at a place where we need comprehensive civil rights regulation overnight, and it's not going to go away just because this bill passes, which here's hoping. But it's going to take a lot of work. It will take mindfulness and inclusiveness.
I share many of my faith background is different from everyone else's, is that the honest truth in a lot of, especially in Afrocentric culture, a lot of our background is LGBT community is in many of the African-American faith background is incompatible to biblical teaching in a sense, so I get what you're saying, and I understand there is a battle with that, what people believe and what they think. What I have done in my pastoral ministry is I have sat down and I've been trying to figure out, where is God leading us to do better in serving all people? And I have done everything I can to try to embrace and love. And so it is, like Rabbi said, it is an ongoing thing. I don't know if we have the fix. Listen, there's a lot of things in our faith we're still trying to figure out the fix. There's a lot of things that we're, as pastors, I would not lie, it is hard for us to serve. It really is. When we have what we call the council culture, that says church is obsolete, we don't done that. There's so much we're trying to fix and so much we're trying to figure out. But here's the thing, is being willing to have honest conversations. I am willing to say, I can't speak for any other pastors, but I can say on my journey I can say, I don't think we've done a great job. I don't think we have done a great job in pastoring people, and perhaps the church needs to repent and say we have not done a great job. You know, we're called in our faith to be disruptors, and we're called to be disciples, but we're called to be disruptors, but not dismissive. And I think we forget that we're being disruptors and being disciples, that we're not to be dismissive. We're to be loving and embracive and relational. I don't know if embracive is a word. If it is, I made it up. But that is our job to do that. So I say the fix is first is us as a church repenting, saying that we have not done a great job. In the Methodist liturgy during communion, we used to say all the time that we fail to be an obedient church. We have not loved our neighbor. We have not heard the cry of the needy, you know, and we will say that in religious routine in some places, but in my heart, I will say that and say, wow, we have not been an obedient church. We have not loved our neighbor. We have not heard the cry of the needy. And we need to repent of that and say, hey, here we are. Have that conversation with me. I may not see every aspect, but I'm willing to grow with you and to learn. You know, there's a lot of things I don't get. There's a lot of definitions I don't get. There's a lot of things that have passed or being introduced that I don't understand, but I'm willing to say, wow, okay, teach me. Show me. And how can I be a better pastor for you? How can our church better love you? That's what I love about our church. It's not a commercial, but we say the healing experience because we want people to experience healing. And so in order to do that, we need to hear truth. And how can we better serve you? All right.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, amen again. I also have kind of a pragmatic approach to that question, Jim. I think that as we see secular life beginning to overtake religious life, the traditions that are going to create more inclusivity, spaces that are affirming and inclusive, and theologies of liberation for all people, these will be to me, these are going to be the spaces that survive this shift. And in the short run, I mean, you can turn people away because you've decided you don't want to be inclusive. And there may be people who leave when you do become more inclusive. But I think we're seeing the turning tide start to happen on multiple levels of issues in our culture right now. And I think it's on the side of inclusivity. One of my favorite poets, Mickey Scott Bass, says we're going to create brave space, not safe space, but brave space. I think that's what Pastor Carter's talking about. Brave space is where we engage the conversations about the things that we don't yet understand, the things that we may have made mistakes about in the past, and we engage relationships that are new and causing us to change and grow. They're transformative spaces. I hope that all of our religious spaces will be that. And you're right, there are religious spaces right now that are not that. And I just have faith that those spaces are eventually going to have to change or they're going to disappear, because those people who are in those spaces, if you're gay and you're showing up in one of those spaces and you're being harmed by being in a space that is not inclusive of you, you're going to quit going and you're going to come to one of our spaces. Because you want to be someplace where you belong and you're loved. That's what we're all looking for. At the most core level, we want to have a sense of belonging and being loved and being lovable. And the spaces that aren't, the religious spaces that aren't creating that are, to me, in the long run, not going to last. So in the meantime, I hope that folks who are experiencing being harmed in those spaces will see that there are other ways to be in the world. And I think that ordinances help send a signal to civil society about what the expectation is for core ways that we interact with each other. I mean, honestly, I moved here from the Midwest and the West. Here's an example. In the South, as you all know, you still see Confederate flags everywhere and Confederate soldier monuments and stuff. I mean, we don't see that kind of stuff, both because it's not part of our history in a place like Colorado or Kansas, although in Kansas we have, John Brown. But I think that as things become less acceptable in the civil space, they become less acceptable in other spaces. When we say, no, it's not okay to celebrate the oppression of another people, and we're not going to allow the symbols of that oppression to continue, the spaces that are honoring that, that are promoting that, begin to shrink. And that's both my hope and my prayer, but also my observation about where I think we are at in history.
I think Claire, are you coming back in, Claire, to kind of wrap us up?
I'm here at the 10-minute point, but you finish wrapping up, and then I'll add a few comments at the end. What a great panel this has been. But no, Flo, you continue if you want to wrap up the panel first.
Well, I was looking at one of the questions and I wanted to respond to it to make sure that Danica Turner said, is that an open invitation? I'm assuming she was asking about lunches for the Women's Interfaith Alliance. Danica, familiar with us. We do meet usually by this fall, if not by the first of next year. We will be meeting again with luncheons, but if you'll just send me in contact with you, I'll make sure you get on our mailing list. And having a wonderful time of fellowship still, as even though we are apart from one another. And I appreciate much that idea of brave space, safe, brave space. I like that, that we move from safe space, continue with the safeness, but move to the brave. And one of the things that I think when we have conversation that I like to use is the term courageous conversation, that we can be courageous in what we do. And I am grateful to all of you all for engaging in that conversation and for the openness that we can share, as we know, want to acknowledge that each of our faiths call to value everyone. That in the way that you have given us a lot to think about. So Claire, with that, unless there's something else any of y'all would like to add.
Yeah, and I don't see any other questions in the question thing, but I do want to give y'all a chance. Is there any other closing comments before I close this out here? Because I do have a few myself. Elizabeth, wrap up there.
I was going to say, one of the things that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said when he was marching with Dr. King was that he was praying with his feet. And that prayer does not just take place within the four walls of a synagogue, church, or mosque. Prayer and living a life of spiritual authenticity happens through our everyday actions. And it's my fervent hope that based on this conversation, we continue to go and engage in prayerful acts of making this community a more loving place. And I just want to thank my amazing panel friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
What a great way. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I am going to make a few concluding comments here. First of all, thank you to all of you. And I've got to give just a very special thanks to Flo for jumping in this morning and leading this. And you've done such a beautiful job, as I felt confident and knew you would. So thank you for taking that on. Thank you to Sarah and Elizabeth and Pastor Chris and to Imam Fofana for your sharing. Has enriched us all. And I think it's, for many people, been a window into some of your communities that many people don't have. If you're a woman, join us at Women's Interfaith Alliance, and we share these kind of conversations all the time, and it's a really rich part of my life as well. We haven't done this yet in any of the other panels, but I want to make sure and say thank you to Hamtech Solutions. What a joy it has been to work with Arian and Christelle Parham to produce this event over the last 2 days. Their knowledge and expertise in virtual productions and marketing have been more than invaluable in making these 4 sessions and these 2 days happen. So thank you to Christelle and Arian. I want to thank the audience that have joined us. Many of you have been here for multiple panels, and we thank you so much for wanting to expand your mind and learn more from this experience. I'm going to say a few things. I'll never forget a few thoughts. NAACP president last night, James Woodall, saying this doesn't need to be the struggle Olympics, speaking of the need to ensure everyone's civil rights. Or Representative Sam Parks saying hate is bad for business. And this morning, Dr. Bethany Rogers adding, we're now learning that silence isn't good for business either. Or Weston Stroud asking last night, would Macon be included in a modern Green Day book? And Dr. Anthony Michael Krause asserting that fear is not a good basis for making policy decisions. And after today's panel, I'm going to be listening. I'm stealing one from you, Pastor Chris. I'm going to be listening to what God is going to download to me. I loved that when you said that today, and so many more things. I hope you have moments like these and your horizons have been expanded and your experiences and vocabulary increased to make your views heard by our county leaders. For more information in the coming months, please follow us on Facebook. If you're a Facebook person, we're at Comprehensive Civil Rights Ordinance of Macon, or you can email us at ccrmacon@gmail.com, and we've got an email list we can add you to, or at least stay connected with you in some way. Finally, if today's or any of the sessions raise more questions for you, or you'd like to have some in-person conversations, we're going to gather very informally tomorrow, Saturday at 3 o'clock at Fall Line Brewery outside for an unstructured time of visiting and sharing of ideas. We'll adhere to COVID precautions, wearing masks and keeping proper distancing. But many people had reached out and indicated that they wanted a chance to talk in person. So the 4 of us that are on the CCR team, which brings me to my last point. What a joy it has been to work alongside, and we will continue to do so, with Andrea Cook and DeMarcus Beckham and Scott Mitchell and myself, who make up the Comprehensive Civil Rights Macon team. We are diverse in every way, bringing different talents and experiences and ideas to this work, and coming together as a team has been such a joy, and hopefully together we are making Macon a better place to live, work, and do commerce for everyone. So again, to all of you, to the other panelists that have been on this week, to our moderators, to everyone who's participated, thank you. And this concludes our 2-day event. Bye-bye.